That's bad.
All right, pressure can be this wonderful thing. It can be your engine's best friend, or it can be your biggest nightmare. It really depends on which side of the piston that pressure is on. What I mean by that is if you have some unnatural way of aspirating your engine, you know, blower, turbo, nitrous, getting your girl really mad and then pointing her face at the carburetor when she starts yelling, that'll put pressure on top of the piston, which will help drive that piston down and, you know, make a little bit more of them horse torques that we all love and appreciate. Now, the pressure that we don't love is that positive pressure on the bottom side of the piston. That makes things work a little bit harder and can lead to some not so fun results. Now, this engine, for example, has a little bit of blow-by, and what's happening is a little bit of that combustion in the cylinder, instead of forcing that piston down, is going around the piston, around the rings, and into the crankcase. And what's happening there, when you really try to get on it, is all that pressure inside the crankcase has to go somewhere. It can't vent out of those breathers on top of the valve covers fast enough, so it has to go somewhere, and in this instance it went out the back of the intake where that China wall is sealed up. So it was blowing out there under harder acceleration, and the entire back of the motor and transmission covered in oil. Got that all resealed up, and now we're going to try to tackle that crankcase pressure with a little bit of an old school trick. Now, there's a few ways you can tackle this. One of the more modern ways that a lot of people would jump to is putting a vacuum pump on it. Now, I'm sure most of you are familiar with a vacuum pump, but if you're not, think of it as basically like an oil pump, but instead of moving oil, it moves air. All you're going to do is bolt it up here with the accessory drive somewhere, run a belt to it. As it spins, it pulls vacuum out of the motor, or pulls pressure, pulls air, however you want to word it. They do also make some electric ones, but all those are not the cheapest thing to get. Like the Jegs one here that you can't really see is $224 for the electric one. I'm sure you can get factory cheaper ones like OEM takeoffs for cheaper than that. But again, they don't seem to do super well, and then you just have to deal with this whole extra circuit, which may not be a big deal, may be a big deal. But there is a third way to do this that is super old school, works really well. We've done it on a few vehicles. The first time I heard of it was back in, would have been before 2010, because the car was still running and together. Anyway, this guy that my dad used to work with, he had a 55 Chevy, actually the first race car I ever saw, which is why 55s are race cars to me. And he had a big block in it with a crankcase evap system running down to the headers. I'm sure you're thinking, what are you talking about connecting the exhaust to the valve covers? Well, like I said, this is a very old school trick that a lot of the old school guys still like to use because it can be done pretty cheap. If you want to do this stuff yourself, you can make it for basically like 10 bucks. You can find them cheaper, but the Moroso crankcase evac kit is, I think, $93. And what it is this. So we'll go over to the big block and I will show you. I wish I had some headers on it to really kind of show what I'm talking about. But there's really four main components to this. First off, you have this little piece of pipe here. This will get welded to the collector on the header at an angle. Now the whole point of that is that's where you're going to get your vacuum source from. Might sound kind of contradictory because you think of exhaust pressure, but if you weld it at an angle and the exhaust is flowing this way, there's pulses in exhaust. So if you weld it on an angle like this, as those pulses goes by, it creates a negative pulse, or whatever you want to call it, that will pull air out of this. So as one pulse of exhaust goes through here and then goes by, it will actually scavenge, that's the word I was trying to think of, exhaust out of the other spots. So if you weld it on an angle like that, this pipe will just act as a fifth primary tube, and it will get scavenged also. So once this is on, you can connect this deal, which is just a one-way check valve, I believe. And then you'll simply connect a piece of hose to this end, and that will go all the way from the collector down in this neighborhood, all the way up to the valve cover. And that is where this is going to go. This is like a two-part baffle kind of deal. That's really all there is to this whole system. Like I said, super simple. If you wanted to do something yourself, what we've done in the past with Jack when he had a small block in it, we never did it with the big block because these are the valve covers off the big block. But what we've done in the past with Jack is just taken a regular old piece of tubing, drilled a hole in the collector, welded it there on an angle, and then took another small pipe and welded it, I don't remember where we had it, I think up here somewhere on the back of it, and then just did it ourselves for like maybe $10 in material for just the hoses. The rest was just leftover scrap. And it actually works really well. Like I said, we've done it on the small blocks that were in Jack. I thought we did it on the big block, but I guess we never had an issue with that, so we never added it. And it sounds kind of hillbilly and kind of old school, and that's because it is, but you're basically just using the physics of the engine as an advantage. Like I said, this car had an issue with excessive blow-by, and it was coming out of the breathers, so this is going to hopefully help reseal those rings, pull a lot of that pressure out of the crankcase, and then I can finish getting this thing together for the guy. So when this thing was dropped off, well, it wasn't dropped off, I had to go pick it up for him, but when I first got this thing, it was running like crap. First of all of the terminals inside the original distributor cap were completely rusted, like too far to even sand them clean. And one of them was bent away, so the engine was only running on like maybe 5.5 cylinders, and the carb still needs a little bit of tweaking, but the thing's actually running pretty good now. Just still has a lot of crankcase pressure. So I'm going to get this thing lifted up in the air and get this setup thrown on it, and I'll show you what it looks like all together on the car. Alright, so now that we got the pieces welded onto the exhaust, and we got our baffles up on the valve covers, we can run the 5/8 hose from the baffles on the valve covers down to the exhaust. And just like that, hoses are on, everything's connected. Like I said, this is a super simple setup. Just make sure to keep the hoses away from the primary tubes, real close to the motor. That's where they'll get super hot and they will melt. Down where it connects into the exhaust system, that doesn't get crazy hot. So these heater hoses are rated for plenty of temperature. And that's really all there is to it. Like I said, just drill holes in the exhaust pipe, preferably in the header collectors, but with this car where everything was, I wasn't able to get it there because it'd be like into the shifter or into the frame rail or anything like that. Or I just physically wasn't able to get the drill in place. So I had to drill it right after the flange. Not a big deal, still gonna get vacuum there. Pretty sure that's where we had it on Jack, was like 8 inches or so after the flange. This one's right up on it. So hopefully the only thing I have left to do to this car before I can get it back to the owner is change the accelerator pump nozzles on the carburetor, because it has a pretty horrible dead spot when you mat it real quick. I think I said earlier that I adjusted the accelerator pump linkage, didn't make a ton of a difference, so going to play with those and then hopefully get the thing done. So a lot of people really do not like Edelbrock carburetors because they're not the best for performance, but they are super simple. Luckily, we got this thing apart without tearing this gasket, which is a lifesaver. But they are super simple. Float height, really easy to adjust, needle and seats, all that. Like I said, unless something's like really wrong with it, you often don't have to pull it off the car to make changes. So pull out these 2 screws here. And get this nozzle off. And then put this one back on. So the one that was on it was a 31, and this one is 44, I believe. So we might have a little bit too much squirter in it now, to where we have to adjust the accelerator pump linkage to the farthest away hole. Away hole. There we go. Put this back in. Make sure. Now we can put all these screws back in, get it all together, get the linkages hooked up, and test it out. And the thing's gonna work absolutely perfect. I can feel it in my bones. I can feel it in my loins. I can feel it deep down in the grundle. This thing's gonna work perfect now. You know that something's going good when your grundle feels good. All right, we're just going to snug them up opposites first. There's a big misconception. People think I hate carbs. And I don't hate carbs. I hate working on carbs, but I don't mind them. Actually, I think in some applications, they're pretty nice. And the throttle response with them just wah, wah. All right. Let's see how we're looking. We got plenty of squirt. Take it down the road and test it real quick. This is one area where EFI shines over carb. We'll just let it warm up for a second. Nothing quite like driving an old G-body. Still ain't quite right. Yeah, still not thrilled with it. I think we're kind of just dealing with Edelbrock stuff here at this point. Alright, so got it running a lot better. It's actually drivable now. When we picked it up, it was running on like 5.5 cylinders. The timing was all over the place. It was running hella rich. It was puffing smoke out the breathers. Like I said, we had to reseal the intake because the rear China wall actually got blown out because of all the crankcase pressure. All that seems good now. I don't know if you'll be able to see. Yeah, you can't really see. But yeah, the back of the motor and the transmission are all dry. No more oil getting blown out the intake. So we're all good there. The crankcase evac system seems to be working perfectly. And like I said, this is a cheap way of getting a vacuum system on your motor that doesn't suck it back into the intake and run it through the combustion chamber and everything. So aside from having a real small stumble when you whack the throttle real fast as you're cruising down the road, it's doing what Edelbrocks do best, and that is just cruise down the road. And once you get past that stumble, like if you roll into it kind of slowly, the thing hauls pretty good. I just can't get it to like those really quick wha 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 once it's under load. But anyway, I think that is going to do it for today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing, clicking that bell. I'll see you next time.